I'm Erica, and this is my channel, Books, Animals, OCD. And today I want to focus on my journey with OCD. It's something I want to talk about because I never knew what OCD really was growing up, my whole life until recently. And OCD is something that I've struggled with my whole life, but I never knew how to identify it or I never knew how to label it OCD. I didn't even know what was going on with my brain. So I feel like it's helpful to. I've been trying to learn about other people's experiences with OCD so I can see the similarities, what we experience, and make those connections. So, um, this last year, I hit an ultimate low with my health and my mental health. My mental and physical health was also taking a toll on some of my relationships. I just wasn't being myself. My close family members recognized that I didn't seem like myself anymore. And it was that low moment that helped me to kind of start having some breakthroughs. The first thing I realized was that I had anxiety. I had never known that before, even though I had met with therapists and taken surveys and stuff. I had never realized that I struggled with anxiety so much because it was so normal for me. As far back as I can remember, it just felt normal to have anxiety. So it wasn't until having kids, I had a lot of postpartum anxiety and OCD, which I didn't know about either one of those until recently. But yeah, postpartum OCD is a real thing too, and that's something that has affected me a lot because I'm pretty sure I had OCD my whole life, but postpartum, for some reason, my OCD got a lot worse and more intense. So I just wanted to kind of describe my experience with it so that other people can understand what it's like. Usually we use OCD as like a figure of speech, as like a joke, like, you're so lucky, your room is so clean. Well, like, oh, my room's clean because I have OCD and everything has to be in its right place. Or, I don't know, people just joke about like, oh, I have to fix that real quick, I'm OCD. And sometimes that's true for people with OCD, but a lot of times, like, that's not what it's like at all to have OCD. A lot of people don't really understand what OCD is and how it affects people. And yeah, so anyways, I wanted to kind of share my experience because some people are actually kind of hurt by when people use OCD as like a joke because they really have it. And for people who do have organizing OCD and counting OCD and cleaning OCD, it's not fun at all. Like it's torture. It's awful. Like they're not like, oh, I'm so glad my room's clean. They're like, I can't believe I spent 7 days cleaning my room and I can't stop. Like I can't stop and I have to do it. And so it's not a fun thing. But for me, my OCD isn't necessarily like super recognizable with like patterns or counting or things like that, cleaning. For me, it's different. There's something called pure O, which is more obsession-heavy OCD and less visible compulsions. Also, OCD includes a lot of compulsions that all happen within your mind. So they aren't necessarily physical actions like washing your hands. So they're more like thought patterns that you keep having again and again and again. So one example is this happened to me a lot in college. I was always a really good student and I got good grades and I loved my classes, but there were always times when I would get overwhelmed and stressed about a homework assignment or a project, and the anxiety would get so big and overwhelm me so much that I would just feel completely panicked and I would start obsessing about which major I should be in. Like, oh, I made a mistake. Like, if I was in the right major, this wouldn't be happening. Or what if I graduate and I'm in the wrong major and then I don't have a good life? The thing about OCD is that it gives you irrational fears that are completely illogical, but they're really convincing. They feel very real. OCD is almost never logical, but yet you can't stop feeling that the situation is urgent and important and dire. Like, I have to do this now. So for me, that's how it was with switching my major. I would start getting anxious, and then I would start researching different majors, and then I would change my major sometimes multiple times within 1 hour. So even if it required me to go get papers signed by professors and department heads I would go get all the papers signed. I would change my major. But then instead of feeling relief, I would feel worse. So then I would change my major again. And that's the OCD cycle, is the compulsion, the action that you do because of the obsession and the anxiety, it doesn't make you feel better. So that's why for people who clean OCD, it's not an enjoyable thing, because no matter how much they clean, it doesn't satisfy the need. It just makes it worse. And that's the same with hand washing or other pattern type OCD, where some people think it's like cool and it's a good quality, but in reality, you can't stop yourself from doing it unless you have some help with going through therapy processes and stuff to kind of rewire your brain. But even then, you feel these really intense desires to do a compulsion that you think will help, even though it won't help. So that was one experience of mine, is college. And even though I'm a good student and I get good grades, it feels like it's impossible for me to graduate college because of that problem. I've changed my major so many times, and I still question it. Like, even though I found a major I love, it's still like always in question of, is this really what I'm supposed to be doing, and compulsively going through major changes and things like that. Another thing is, I occasionally have checking OCD, where even though I know that the door is locked or that the oven is turned off, I have to check it maybe 3 or 4 times before forgetting about it. Some people have it much worse than me. Some people check doors and stoves and lights for hours before bed. Like they have to check certain things over and over again. Luckily, that only happens to me when I'm especially anxious, that I check things. Shopping makes me really anxious because I have a big fear that someone will think I'm stealing, even though I am usually okay shopping when I'm with other people. Well, actually, no, I never like shopping, basically. Whenever I leave the store, I always think that someone's going to think I'm stealing, so I always have to hold the things in a certain way or make it obvious that I paid for it. And that's an obsession and compulsion that you wouldn't notice from the outside, but inside it's not fun to feel like that all the time. Like, oh, what if this person thinks I'm stealing? What if they think I'm stealing? I also have to check my purse a lot when I go out. So like every 5 minutes, I look in my purse to make sure I have my phone, my wallet, and my keys, and whatever else I had to bring with me. So I'm basically counting those objects again and again until I get home and put my purse back in its spot, and then I can finally let that go. But it's just a kind of a anxious action that doesn't make any sense, like I just barely checked that my phone was in there, so obviously it didn't fall out somehow magically, but I still have to check because my mind is convinced that, well, what if it just disappeared? Same with the door. Like, what if when I looked away it unlocked itself? Like, that defies the law of physics, but my brain still tells me, well, it might have unlocked itself, like you better go check again. Another thing is, like, when I'm checking out at the store, I feel a need to like make sure all my cards are in my wallet, because I have a really intense fear that when I open my wallet, something's going to fall out. Like when I pay for something, even though I'm holding it upright and it has a zipper and everything, I'm still afraid that, like, what if my money and my cards or something just fell out? So I usually have to check everything to make sure it's still in there while I'm at the cash register, which is really anxiety inducing because there's people waiting behind me and stuff. But yeah, so either I'm checking it like at the cash register or when I walk back to my car or in my car or all of them, depending on the day. I do a lot of things, like throughout my life I've always like had to do certain things, like because I was afraid that if I didn't do it, something bad would happen in the future, like moving a rock out of the sidewalk. And it's not like a terrible, for me this isn't like a compulsion that like drives me crazy or anything, because some people will get stuck in a compulsion of trying to like prevent accidents by like, moving rocks out of the sidewalk and going and going and going and not being able to stop. For me, it's more like if I happen to see a rock in front of me, I always have to move it to the side, because I'm like, what if a kid comes by on their scooter and hits it and gets like a serious accident and it would be my fault? Like, I would feel so bad, So a lot of like fear-based decisions where you feel like if I don't do this, something bad's going to happen and I'm going to regret it, so I better just do it. And it's not really a healthy mindset. Like, it's not a bad thing to move the rocks out of the way. I mean, I think that's considerate, but it's not a healthy mindset to do all those things out of constant fear and feeling like it's your responsibility somehow. I also have a fear that if like I don't pick up trash, that like an animal will eat it and die. Um, Another thing is I struggled a lot with religious OCD. Ever since I was like pretty young, like around 11 years old, I've been like really devout with my faith. Like it's been really, really important to me. Um, but now I'm finally learning that some of the things that I do and did are more anxiety and OCD based than faith based. So it started out as a good thing because I was able to like I had a really strong desire to connect with God and to pray and to study the Word of God, to study scriptures, and to like spend quiet time journaling and things like that. And it was a really good thing for me. It really helped me start like as a teenager and as an adult. Really helped me feel like I had a lot of peace in my life and I had like a good foundation in my life. But somehow after having kids, like the OCD just kind of took over, and I wasn't able to do all the things that I used to do, like you know, praying whenever I wanted or reading in the scriptures whenever I wanted, without having the kids, tearing pages out of my Bible or my Book of Mormon. So like that got really stressful for me. So after having kids, suddenly I always felt like I was lacking, like I was always falling short all the time in everything. I would feel guilty all day, every day for years because I felt like I didn't pray long enough or didn't read enough of the scriptures, or because I wasn't able to do certain religious practices as much as I did before. And I also would like carry that religious OCD into how I was like with my family, how I was raising my kids. So I had a lot of like kind of false ideals. Basically, like one thing that happens with religious OCD is that you set a higher standard for yourself than like God has set for you, like than your religion has set for you. So my faith might say like that families are important and that mothers and fathers should work together to raise their children. And my OCD would take it to the next level, the next level, the next level. Like I was afraid of ever being away from my kids because I had so much anxiety about doing the right thing and being with them all the time and being a good mom. And I was terrified of having my own hobbies or doing anything that I enjoyed because I felt like it wasn't righteous. So that was a serious OCD problem. Luckily now I'm a lot better with that. I can actually have hobbies and do things I enjoy without feeling guilty all the time. But before it really was constant guilt all the time. Even if I was doing exactly what I was supposed to do, I still felt guilty because I wasn't doing it well enough. Like I wasn't keeping up with the chores good enough, or I wasn't teaching my kids these things good enough. It was just constant guilt, and after several years of that, I finally crashed. And I'm grateful I did because it helped me to learn a lot of things that have helped me be a healthier mother and wife and person. But yeah, religious OCD is no fun, and unfortunately it really drives people away from their religion and the things that they love and believe in because it just makes you miserable living your faith. So luckily I'm really glad that I could learn about that because now I live my faith in a more balanced way where I can recognize that I am enough and that God is happy with the things that I do, even though I am in a different phase of life right now than I was before. I can't do all the things that I did when I was a single young person that now that I have little kids and they depend on me and I have a husband to take into consideration and a lot of responsibilities, and God understands that, and He's recognizes the things that I do to connect with Him, but He's not constantly upset with me. But in my mind, He was. In my mind, He was judgmental and harsh and always disappointed with me no matter what, and that's just not true, but that's how I felt. So religious OCD is rough. I have some OCD tendencies around technology. Even when I was a kid, like I was really obsessed with this idea that technology was bad and that there's a certain time limit for you could be on technology, and after that, it's just like bad. Like I would feel really guilty and be really uncomfortable with technology a lot of times. I'd play computer games and then I would like be on for an hour or so, and then I would just obsess about that and be like, I can't believe I spent that much time on the computer. Like I'm so bad and I wasted all this time. Just like obsessing constantly about those things. It's still a weird thing for me that like if my husband gets his laptop out just to like look something up, I like kind of get tense because I have this weird obsession with technology where it just makes me uncomfortable in certain situations. And it's weird. I don't know why. Like, I'm getting better at it because I'm realizing that technology is a gateway for a lot of good things. But yeah, I still get uncomfortable. Like, if I'm on the computer for too long in my mind, like, I have this feeling that something bad's going to happen or that I did something really bad. Um, Also, I love animals, but my recent OCD struggles, like, a lot of times revolve around hobbies. So, um, since having kids and becoming a mom, I really wanted to get back into my own interests and hobbies when I realized, like, I don't have any hobbies anymore. Like, I should get hobbies because I need to be a person. I need to be like myself. So I started getting back into hobbies, and I really like animals, so I started getting into animals. But the problem is I get really, really obsessed really fast and really deep with things. So at one point I decided to have guinea pigs, and they were like a really good fit for our family, and I really liked them. Like, they made me really happy, and I took good care of them because I researched like an insane amount to know how to take care of them and all of the details of the guinea pigs' biology and social needs and everything, like nutritional needs. Like, my husband tells me I'm like the best pet owner in the world because I learned so much and I care so much about it that, like, I really, really, really do research. And the problem was with these guinea pigs is I got so deep into it that, like, it became a huge stressor because, I had two guinea pigs that were really happy. They had a good, healthy sized amount of space in their enclosure. They had the right food and everything, the right quality of hay. They had all the things I needed to be healthy. But my mind always took it a step farther. I was like, well, they'd be happier if they lived in a herd because naturally guinea pigs are supposed to be like a herd animal. So anyways, I wanted to get more guinea pigs, and we don't have a lot of money right now. We're like a young family that just graduated with little kids. So that's another stressor. Is like when I get into something, like, nothing else matters, just that thing. But anyways, I ended up being able to rescue a few more guinea pigs, which was really cool. But I got obsessed with trying to introduce the two pairs of guinea pigs together. So, like, it's a pretty complicated process to introduce guinea pigs to each other, and sometimes it just doesn't work out. But basically, I researched a lot, like an insane amount, and I spent a lot of days trying to introduce them properly, and it didn't work. And it was kind of crushing for me because I was so obsessed with that idea. But I just kept doing more and more things, like building them a huge enclosure using like an old shelf and all these things that I eventually just got totally overwhelmed because I have little kids and I'm busy, but I couldn't stop myself from going deeper and deeper and deeper. So sadly, I ended up getting really sick and having a lot of health problems. Like I mentioned, I hit like a ultimate low physically and emotionally. And part of that was I was having really bad reactions to everything, especially animals. So the hay and the guinea pigs, it was too much for me. I couldn't take care of them, and it was really sad. But like, it was an experience I have to learn from because that's what OCD does. Sometimes it takes me farther and farther and farther until it's beyond what I can pay for or what I can have time to do. It just gets me in too deep too fast. One of my worst OCD animal experiences was with snakes. I was never particularly into snakes, but like sometime in the last year, I started researching reptiles because I was having the allergy problems with the guinea pigs. So I was like, maybe I could find an allergy-friendly animal. And so I got really interested in reptiles, and now I really like reptiles, including snakes. But I got so excited about snakes and reptiles that there was a period where for 3 weeks straight, I couldn't stop thinking about snakes all day, and then dreaming about them all night, and then waking up and thinking about them again all day. That lasted 3 weeks, and in that time, I felt a desperate, desperate need to have a snake. And luckily, my husband was like, let's wait on this a little while. This is kind of moving kind of fast. Let's give it some time and wait until our new baby is born and then see, how you're feeling about it. And I was so glad he made me wait. At first, I was really mad because in the moment, it felt like I had to have a snake or else I couldn't ever move on with my life. That's what happens with OCD is your mind is so fixed on something that you feel like until you resolve that issue, you'll never be able to move on. And that's how I felt. And I'm really grateful now that I did wait and that he helped me like have a little bit of patience and have more balance because After having my baby, I was like, I have little kids and I'm not ready to take care of a snake right now. Like, it's not an ideal situation. Plus, I started having nightmares about snakes after that. Another weird thing that happens to me. I had all these really weird, scary nightmares about snakes, and I was grateful that I wasn't taking care of a snake in the moment. Yeah, I've had obsessive OCD things with several different species of animals, which is one reason why I want this channel to talk about all these really cool species that I learn about. It starts out as a good thing, but it just has to be like controlled because it gets out of control really easily. Another thing is I had a lot of fear about bad things happening to my kids at night. So for a long time, I would get up at night and check on them all the time and always be worried that something terrible was going to happen at night when I wasn't with my kids. A lot of times, another thing that happens is good things turn into bad things for me. For example, when I published my first book, I was so excited that I couldn't stop thinking about it. And before I knew it, it was super stressful and exhausting because I couldn't stop thinking about it. So it went from being excited to being an anxious wreck. And that's what happens with OCD for me a lot of times is I don't want to be excited about things because if I am, it will just turn into obsession and then it will just turn into anxiety and it will be exhausting. Other thing is, let's see. I tend to go all or nothing. So after becoming a mom, I tried to get back into horseback riding, but I just got sucked so deep into it that all day long, when I wasn't riding, I would watch videos about horses and be reading books about horses and watching videos about different techniques of riding. And it made me sad because my kids were with me and I needed to give them attention and time, but my mind couldn't stop focusing on this one thing. And along with that, I felt like now that I'm riding horses, I have to lease a horse and buy a horse and dedicate my life to horseback riding. Like it has to be my full-time career. That's just how my brain tends to work, is all or nothing, no in between. So eventually it got so overwhelming that I stopped it because I was so afraid of that obsession. I didn't want it to ruin my family. The thing about OCD also is that we tend to have fears that like we'll do something terrible, like I'm afraid that I'll be obsessed with horses and leave my family to pursue horses. But people with OCD very rarely actually do that kind of thing. There are other mental health conditions that might actually lead to something like that happening. But with OCD, it's not usually the case because people with OCD tend to really care deeply about things. And the OCD attacks the thing that they care most about, like their family or their religion or their values. But they really are unlikely, based on studies, to do the things that they fear that they'll do. Anyways, I ended up stopping horses completely because it was so overwhelming. But nowadays, I'm a lot better. Now I'm involved with horses, but I'm doing it in a way that I can actually handle right now in this phase of life. I'm learning how to have more balance, but it's hard for me. Another compulsion that's really common with OCD that I have is when I talk to someone or text someone, I think about it afterwards, and I think that I offended them. So I tend to say sorry and apologize to people or ask them if they're okay or if I offended them, even though they have no idea why I'm asking them back. They're like, of course, like you didn't say anything bad. Like I had a great time talking to you. And in my mind, I'm like, oh, that's a relief because I was pretty sure I completely offended you and you didn't want to talk to me anymore. But the weird thing is that getting that reassurance from them, it doesn't help because compulsions don't help OCD. So even though you feel like you have to ask them, did I hurt your feelings? And they say, no, of course not. You're still worried, like maybe I still did, and they're just not telling me. Anyways, that was a long, very long video, and I didn't cover, obviously, very much about OCD, just some of my experiences. Another common, I just want to mention this because I didn't know this before, but another common compulsion for someone with OCD is to avoid something that they might have obsessions about. And that's like what I mentioned for me is I was afraid of having hobbies because I was so worried that I would get obsessed with them and then do something drastic, like leave my family. So the compulsion ends up just avoiding things that you might be obsessed with, or obsessing about the fear of obsessing, or obsessing about the fear of having compulsion. So it's kind of a weird, complicated thing, and that's why a lot of times OCD is not easy to recognize because it's happening in your head in this weird cycle of like avoiding people because you're afraid of this one thing, or avoiding interests and hobbies or avoiding certain situations that usually give you obsessions. That's like sometimes I have to avoid going to places with animals because I will become obsessed. And it's a weird thing. Like there's also strengths to having OCD. A lot of people use it to do awesome, amazing things. For me, a good outlet has been writing my books and learning new things about animals, but I always have to make sure that I don't get sucked in too deep, which is really hard. Sometimes it happens, and then I feel like I am drowning, and it's not fun anymore. So, yeah, that's a little bit about my experience, and I'd love to hear from you if you have any experiences to share. I'm just hoping to open the conversation about OCD so that people who struggle with it can actually recognize it or know that they're not alone, because I never knew other people experienced these things until just a few months ago. So thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye.